3 days before his society wedding, the richest doctor in the building walked across his own gleaming hospital lobby, pressed a white envelope of 20,000 naira into the hand of the woman who mopped his floors, and told her quietly to take it, leave Lagos, and never come anywhere near the celebration. Ngozi Okeke stood very still on the marble she had cleaned that same morning, in her plain gray uniform with a cleaning cloth still folded over her wrist, and she looked at the envelope in her hand, and then up at Dr. Ekene Balogun's smooth, impatient face. And she did not argue, and she did not weep, and she did not ask him what she had done. She only set the envelope down on the edge of the marble bench between them, gently, the way you set down a thing that is not yours, and said that she had taken nothing from his family, and would take nothing now. The lobby went quiet the way a busy place goes quiet when the powerful do something small and cruel in the open. A nurse at the long counter stopped writing, and 2 visitors waiting on the low chairs looked at their hands, and a security man by the glass doors shifted his weight and looked away, because everyone there understood, without being told, what it meant for the owner of the hospital to push money at the woman who cleaned it and tell her to disappear. Ngozi felt the cold air move over the back of her neck, and she felt the eyes, and under her gray uniform, pressed flat against her chest, where it had ridden for years. She felt the stiff edge of a sealed envelope that was not the one in his hand. She lifted her chin a little, the way a woman lifts it when the world has decided to be unfair, and she let him think she was only a cleaner who did not know her place. He did not know that she knew exactly whose floors these were. He did not know that she had been waiting, with a patience that had cost her more than he would ever pay, for the day the truth he was trying to buy off would have to be spoken in a room he could not empty. He thought he was handing a frightened poor woman enough money to vanish before she embarrassed him in front of the families gathering for his wedding. He did not know that the envelope against her chest had been pressed there by his own dying mother, or what it said, or whose name was written inside it and underlined twice in a hand he would have known at a glance. He saw a cleaner. He had always, his whole comfortable life, seen only the cleaner. Ngozi Okeke was 29 years old, and for 4 years she had cleaned the floors and the glass and the long bright corridors of the Balogun Memorial Hospital, a private hospital named for a family that did not know she belonged to it. She rose before light in a single rented room on the mainland, left a small sleeping child in the care of a neighbor, and rode 2 crowded buses across the city to push a mop over marble for a wage that bought rice and not much else. The other cleaners had a name for her, half affection and half warning. The quiet one, they called her, because she kept her own counsel, did her work without complaint, and carried herself even in a gray uniform with a cloth over her wrist, like a woman who knew something the building did not. She had not taken the job by accident, and she had not stayed in it out of having no choice, though it would have looked like both to anyone watching. She had stayed because of a promise made to a woman no longer alive to release her from it, and because the truth she carried against her chest could only be made to matter in this building, on a day that had not yet come. So she had cleaned and waited and said nothing for 4 long years, while above her on the polished upper floors the family that had erased her own mother went on living as though no debt were owed to anyone. She had learned, in those 4 years, how to be invisible to rich people, which is the easiest thing in the world, because rich people do it for you. The child in her single room was the last of it. The little one was not her own by blood in the way the world counts blood, but was hers in every way that mattered. The youngest left behind when the woman who had been a sister to Ngozi died too young and too poor, and Ngozi had taken the child without a second thought because that was simply what you did. She fed the child first and herself second. She kept the child clean and warm, and when the time came, in a school uniform, she pressed flat each night and laid ready on the one chair, because a uniform was a future, and a future was the one thing no one could take. Everything Ngozi did, the buses and the marble, and the silence, she did with that small folded uniform somewhere behind it. Here is the very thing this channel was built for. So let me say it to you plainly before we go on. If you have ever carried a truth that nobody powerful wanted to hear, and been treated as nothing by people who would not have dared if they knew who you were, and kept your dignity anyway, because losing it would have cost more than staying quiet, then you already belong here with us under the Baobab. Take one moment to subscribe to Baobab Tales, because the quiet, overlooked, hard-working people who carry the truth and ask for nothing until the day it must be spoken are exactly the ones these stories are told for. And I do not want you to miss what one rich man's bribe was about to do to Ngozi Okiki, or what a dead woman's sealed will was about to do right back. To understand the woman standing straight in her gray uniform on that cold marble, you have to go back, past the hospital, and the mop, and the bribe, to a different house, and a different woman, and to a wrong done long before Ngozi was old enough to know it had been done to her. Her mother had been named Chidinma, and Chidinma had come to Lagos as a girl from the East with nothing but her hands, and had found work as a live-in housemaid in a large house belonging to a wealthy family, the kind of house with a long gate, and a generator that never went quiet, and a mistress who was kind in her way, and a master who was not. Chidinma had cooked and scrubbed, and carried, and been grateful for the roof, and made herself small, the way the poor learn to make themselves small in the houses of the rich. What happened to Chidinma in that house was the oldest and ugliest of stories, and Ngozi would not learn the whole of it for many years. When the housemaid was found to be carrying a child, the family did what such families did to protect their name. She was not helped, and she was not kept. She was paid a little to keep silent, and put out of the gate, erased from the household as though she had never folded their laundry or carried their water, and the child she carried was made, by the simple cruelty of money and silence, into a child who did not officially exist. Chidinma did not fight it because there was no one to fight it with, and nowhere to take her fight. She went back across the city, poor and shamed and alone, and she had her daughter, and she named her Ngozi, which means blessing, because she would not let the world tell her the child was anything else. So Ngozi grew up not knowing the name of the house that had cast her mother out, only that there had been one, only that her mother sometimes went very still and far away when certain kinds of cars passed, certain kinds of gates. Chidinma raised her daughter alone and tired and proud, cleaning other people's houses and selling small things at the roadside, and she taught the girl two things above all others. The first was that being poor was not the same as being worthless, and that no one, however rich, could make her less than she was, unless she let them. The second she taught without words, simply by the straightness of her back when the world pressed on it, and it was this, that you do not have to shout to refuse to be erased. Chidinma died worn out before her time, the way poor women who have carried too much so often do, and she died without ever telling her daughter the name of the family or the full shape of the wrong, because she had decided, in her pride, that her child would not carry that weight. She left Ngozi grown, but unanchored, a young woman alone in a hard city, with a good heart and no map of where she had come from. And it might have ended there, the wrong buried with the woman it had been done to, the daughter never knowing whose floors she would one day clean, except that across the city, in the very house that had cast Chidinma out, another woman was dying too. And that woman had not forgotten. Her name was Madame Alucci Balagoon, and she had been the mistress of that long-gated house, the kind woman in her way. And she had been kind in her way too late and too little when the housemaid was put out. And she had carried the shame of it quietly for nearly 30 years. She had been a young wife then, without power of her own in her husband's house, and she had let the thing be done because the men of the family decided it, and because she had been afraid, and she had told herself it was not her sin to answer for. But a conscience does not accept that bargain forever. As her own life narrowed toward its end, widowed now and frail, Madame Alucci found that the one thing she could not make peace with, the one debt that would not let her go, was the housemaid she had failed, and the child of that housemaid, somewhere in the city, who had been made to not exist. So in her last years, with a quiet determination that surprised the people around her, Madame Alucci set out to find that child. It was not easy, because erasure is thorough, and the poor are hard to trace. But she had money and time, and the particular patience of a woman trying to save her own soul, and in the end, she found her. She found a young cleaner named Ngozi Okeke, living in a single room on the mainland, raising a child not her own, working herself thin and asking no one for anything. And she saw in the young woman's straight back and quiet eyes the very housemaid she had failed half a lifetime before. And Madame Alucci understood, sitting across from this young woman who did not yet know who she was, that here was the wrong she had been given one last chance to put right. She did not blurt it out. She came to know Ngozi slowly and carefully, over months, as an old woman who had taken an interest in a deserving young one, which the family thought a harmless eccentricity of the dying. And when she was sure, when she had gathered the old proof and the old truth, and set it down in order, she told Ngozi everything, gently, in a quiet room. She told her about Chidinma and the long-gated house, and the gate she had been put out of. She told her that the master of that house, long dead now, had been Ngozi's father in the flesh, if never in name, and that Ngozi was therefore, by every law of God, and by the law of the land, if it could only be proven, as much a child of the Balagoon family as the polished son who would one day run their hospital. And she told her that she had no intention of dying, with that truth still buried. But Madame Alucci was dying inside a family, and a family has its own gates. The man who ran the household now, in all but name, was her late husband's nephew, Chief Emeka Balagoon, a smooth, heavy, reputation-controlled man who had made himself indispensable to the old woman's affairs as her health failed, and who managed the family's money and its estate, and, increasingly, its silences. Emeka had no intention of letting the family name be reopened, and less intention still of letting a cleaner be acknowledged as an heir, because Emeka had reasons of his own, which the old woman half suspected and could not yet prove. For years he had been quietly bleeding the estate he managed, moving what was not his into places it should not have gone, and the last thing on earth he could afford was a new heir with a lawyer and a right to ask exactly where the family's money had been. So when Madame Alucci spoke, even weakly, of putting an old wrong right, Emeka soothed and delayed, and stood between her and every door, and she came to understand that she would not be allowed to do it openly while she lived. So she did it the only way left to her, which was quietly, and in writing, and beyond his reach. She sent for the one person in Lagos she trusted entirely, an old friend and a lawyer of fierce and well-known incorruptibility named Barrister Adaora Eze, who had handled estates for 30 years and had never once been bought, and who came to the old woman's bedside and listened to the whole shameful story without flinching. Together with Sister Comfort, the senior nurse, as one honest witness and a second brought in from outside the house, Madame Alucci made her will. Not the polite official will the family expected, but a true one, dated and signed and witnessed, that set down the wrong done to Chidinma, named Ngozi Okeke as her natural granddaughter and a rightful heir to a stated share of the Balagoon estate, and instructed that the truth be made known. And she wrote, in her own failing hand, a letter to the granddaughter she had found too late, to be opened with the will. She had the will and the letter sealed, the cream legal envelope closed with old wax and tied in faded red ribbon. And she did a careful thing, a thing that would matter more than she could know. She lodged one executed copy with Barrister Adaura Eze in the lawyer's own safe, where Emeka could not reach it, and the other she pressed, with her own thin hands, into the hands of Ngozi herself, in a quiet room with the lamp low, and she closed the young woman's fingers around it and made her promise two things. The first was that she would keep the child in her care safe and in school, whatever came. And the second was that she would keep this envelope, against her heart if she had to, and not waste it on begging at the family's doors, but wait. And when the day came that the truth had to be spoken where it could not be denied, that she would open it where they could not look away. Ngozi promised both, kneeling by the old woman's chair, not yet knowing how heavily the second promise would one day come due. Madame Alucci died not long after, on a quiet morning, and the family buried her with great show and greater relief, and Chief Emeka moved at once to settle her affairs in the tidy, managed way that suited him, producing the polite official will that said nothing of any housemaid or any hidden child, and assuming, as such men do, that the matter was closed, because he had closed it. He did not know that a second, truer will sat in a lawyer's safe across the city. He did not know that the dead woman had found the cleaner. And he certainly did not know that the cleaner, grieving the one person who had ever told her who she was, had taken a job mopping the floors of the family's own hospital and meant to wait there, invisible and patient, for exactly the right room. For 4 years, Ngozi waited and worked and kept her word. It was not a soft life, but it was an honest one, and there was a fierce private steadiness in it that the gossiping cleaners never quite saw. She rose before light and rode the buses and pushed the mop. And she kept the child in a clean uniform and good shoes. And she carried the sealed envelope against her chest under her gray uniform every single day, because she had promised, and because some part of her could not bear to leave it anywhere a thief might reach. She watched Dr. Ikenna Balagoon stride through his lobby in his fine suits, her own half-brother who did not know her face, and she felt no hatred for him, only a strange, tired patience, because the old woman had taught her that the day would come, and a promise kept is a kind of anchor in a hard sea. She had thought, in her quietest hopes, that the day might come gently, that perhaps she would find the right moment to go to the lawyer, that the will would be read in some calm office, that the family would be shamed but not in public, that justice could be a quiet thing. She had not imagined it would be the wedding that forced it. But the wedding came, the great society wedding of Dr. Ikenna Balagoon to the daughter of another wealthy family, planned for the grand hall of an expensive hotel, with the old families of Lagos invited and the photographers booked, and the family name polished to a high shine. And it was the wedding, and the old friends of his dead mother who would attend it, that put a small fatal crack in the family's careful silence. Because some of those old friends had known Madame Alucci in her last years, and had heard her speak, in her wandering final months, of a young woman she had found, a wrong she meant to put right. And when one or two of them, visiting the hospital, had glimpsed a quiet cleaner whose straight back and steady eyes reminded them, with an odd cold tug, of something the dead woman had said, they had murmured about it, the way people murmur. And the murmur, in time, reached Chief Emeka, and through him reached Dr. Ikenna Balagoon, 3 days before his wedding, that there was a cleaner in the hospital that some of his late mother's friends found strangely familiar, and that it would be wise, with so many important guests gathering, to make sure the woman was nowhere near. Ikenna had not asked too many questions, because rich men who are about to be embarrassed prefer not to know the details. He had simply decided, in the practical, image-conscious way that ran in the family, that the cleanest solution to an awkwardness was money. A poor woman could be paid to disappear. It cost so little, and it solved so much. He had not even thought of it as cruelty. He had thought of it as management. And so he had crossed his own lobby with a white envelope of 20,000 naira and pressed it into the hand of the woman who mopped his floors, and told her quietly to take it and leave Lagos and never come near his wedding. Which is where this story began, and where, on that cold marble, 4 years of waiting met 3 days of panic. What happened next happened quietly and in public, and it was the kind of cruelty that is worse for being calm. He told her, low enough to be private and clear enough to be obeyed, that this was a generous thing he was doing, that the money was hers if she was sensible, that all she had to do was go, today, and not be seen again. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke to her the way you speak to a problem you expect to solve itself once the cheque clears. And when she set the envelope down on the marble bench and said she would take nothing, a flicker of irritation crossed his smooth face. The irritation of a man not used to a cleaner who does not simply do as she is paid to do. He told her not to be foolish, that she should think of herself, that there would not be a second offer. And Ngozi looked at him, her own brother, and at the white envelope lying on the marble, and at the security man by the doors who would walk her out if it came to that, and she felt the sealed will press against her chest like a second heartbeat, and she did the hardest thing, which was to say nothing more and to leave. She did not tell him who she was. She did not throw the money or the truth in his face in that lobby, because she had promised the dead woman she would not waste it begging at a door, and a lobby was just another door. She picked up her bucket and her cloth, and she walked out through the glass on her own 2 feet, with her chin level and the envelope of bribe money left lying on the bench behind her, and she let him believe he had won. This is the moment the channel was built to make you feel. So sit with it for one breath before we go on, because if you have ever been handed money to make you disappear by people who would have been on their knees if they knew the truth you were carrying, then you already know exactly how cold that polished lobby felt under those marble lights. If you've made it this far into Ngozi's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. She did not break down on the bus home, and she did not curse the doctor who could not see his own sister, and she did not give the staring lobby the collapse it half expected. She rode the long road across the city with her hands quiet in her lap and her face still, and she climbed the stairs to her single room and looked at the small folded uniform laid ready on the chair for the morning, and only then, with the door shut and the child asleep at a neighbor's, did something in her give way. Because it is one thing to be poor, and another thing entirely to be told to vanish by your own blood, handed money to erase yourself, by people who would not have dared if they knew that a dead woman had already written your name into their estate. That night was the lowest Ngozi had been since she buried her mother. Mama Tessie, the stout fellow cleaner whose room was down the corridor and who had worked beside her for years, sat with her a long while in the lamplight, fierce and loyal, saying that a man who could push money at a poor woman and tell her to disappear was not a big man, but a coward in a fine suit, and that God did not sleep. But loyalty does not make a case, and when Mama Tessie had gone the room was quiet, and the sealed envelope lay on the small table in the lamplight where Ngozi had finally taken it out from against her chest. And for the first time in 4 years she was angry at the old woman who had given it to her. Madame Alucci had told her to wait, to keep it, not to beg, to trust that the day would come. And here was the day. And here was Ngozi. told to vanish like a stain, with a sealed envelope full of a dead woman's handwriting, and no power on earth to make anyone in that family listen. She pressed the cream envelope to her face and thought, just once, with her whole exhausted heart, that perhaps the old woman had been wrong, that in the real world the rich closed their gates and the poor stayed outside them, and a dead woman's promise was worth less than a white envelope of cash. And then, because her hands needed something to do that was not despair, she broke the old wax at last, and untied the faded red ribbon, and drew out the pages, and for the first time she read not the will, but the letter folded with it. The letter Madame Alucci had written in her own failing hand, and that Ngozi had carried unopened for 4 years, because she had been told to wait. My Ngozi, the old woman had written. If you are reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry I found you so late, and sorrier still for the wrong my house did to your mother, which I let happen, and have carried every day since. But hear me now. You are not nothing. You were never nothing. They made you a secret to protect a name, but a name cannot be paid away, and blood does not become less true because the rich decide to forget it. I have written it all down where it cannot be argued, and given it to a dowra who cannot be bought, and given it to you who cannot be frightened. So do not beg them. Do not stand at their gate. Keep the child in school, and when the day comes that they try to make you disappear, do not fight them small, my daughter. Take what I have given you, and open it where they cannot look away, and let it speak for me and for your mother both. Ngozi wept then in a way she had not let herself weep, not in the lobby, not on the bus. The old woman's voice reaching her across 4 years on the very night she had been ready to give up. Madame Alucci had written her a shield and sealed it into an envelope she would carry for years without ever truly reading the end of it, and waited, from beyond her own grave, for the night her granddaughter would need it. Open it where they cannot look away. The old woman had not known about the wedding or the white envelope of 20,000 naira, but she had known her own family, and she had known the world, and she had left her exactly the instruction she needed. There was a difference between begging at a rich man's lobby and proving a thing in a room where it could not be denied. And Ngozi, drying her eyes, began, for the first time, to think not like a woman who had been told to disappear, but like a woman who meant to be seen. But a sealed envelope full of a dead woman's handwriting, however true, is one poor woman's word against a rich family's lawyers, and Ngozi knew it. She needed the one person Madame Alucci had trusted, the one who held the second copy, and could make a will stand where it could not be wriggled away from. She had the old woman's instruction and a name, Adaura Eze, and the next morning, instead of riding to the hospital to push a mop, she put on her best plain blouse and wrapper, wrapped the cream envelope in a clean cloth, and went across the city to find the lawyer her grandmother had told her could not be bought. Barrister Adaura Eze was not easily surprised, but she had been waiting, in a sense, for 4 years too. She had kept Madame Alucci's true will in her safe, and watched the family settle the estate on the polite false one, and she had been unable to act alone, because a lawyer cannot force a sealed will into the open without the heir who is named in it, and the heir had vanished into the city as a cleaner, and never come. When the young woman in the worn wrapper was shown into her office, and laid a cream envelope tied in faded red ribbon on the desk, the same ribbon, the same wax, Adaura Eze went very still, and then she looked at the young woman's face for a long moment, and she said, quietly, that she had been hoping for years that this day would come, because she had a great deal she had been keeping safe. She told Ngozi what she held. The executed second copy of the true will, lodged the same week the old woman made it, dated and witnessed and beyond Chief Emeka's reach. The witness statements, including Sister Comfort's, taken at the bedside. And, Adora said, with the cold satisfaction of an honest lawyer who has watched a thief for years and finally has a way to reach him, she had something more. In the long, careful business of being ready, she had quietly noted the ways the Balagoon estate had been managed since Madame Alucci's health failed, and she had seen enough to be certain that Chief Emeka had been moving the estate's money where it should not go. She could not prove all of it alone. But a true will, reopened in public, would compel exactly the formal accounting of the estate that Emeka had spent years avoiding, and an accounting, she said, has a way of finding what a clever man has hidden. The will would clear Ngozi's name, and in clearing it, it would pull the thread that unraveled the man who had buried her. That was the turn. The moment a sad story of a poor woman paid to vanish became a reckoning that could actually be won. But it needed witnesses willing to stand, and the first of them came to Ngozi through the hospital itself, through the very building the family was so sure held nothing but a cleaner. Sister Comfort, the senior nurse, had nursed Madame Alucci through her last weeks, had seen the quiet cleaner sit at the old woman's bedside in the evenings when the family had gone, and had been one of the two honest witnesses to the true will. When Ngozi carefully told her what was happening, Sister Comfort did not hesitate. She had carried the memory of that bedside for 4 years, and the sight of a good young woman being paid to disappear had sat ill with her since the day she heard of it. She would say what she had seen and witnessed, she said, in any room they liked, because she was too old and too tired to be afraid of a man like Chief Emeka, and because the dead deserved to have their last wishes honored. So Ngozi had her witnesses now, and her will, and the lawyer's lodged copy, and the witness statements, but she was still a cleaner with no idea how to make a rich family answer for what they had done. And here she said the things she had been turning over since the night she read the letter. Not in a quiet office, she said, and not in a slow court years from now where the family's lawyers could bury it the way they had buried her mother. She wanted it done the way the old woman had told her, where they could not look away. And there was only one room coming in which the whole family, and the old friends who had murmured, and the society that protected them, would all be gathered together with the photographers running. The wedding. The very celebration she had been paid to disappear from. Barrister Adora Eze looked at this cleaner in her worn wrapper for a long moment, and then, for the first time in the meeting, she smiled, because it was exactly what she would have advised, and a great deal more satisfying coming from the client herself. The lawyer made her arrangements with the quiet of a woman who has done this before. A will may be read by its executor, and Madame Alucci had named Adora Eze her executor in the true document, which gave the lawyer every right to act. And a reception full of witnesses was, she observed dryly, simply a convenient place to do her duty. She prepared the will, the letter, the witness statements, and the careful summary of the estate's troubling accounts. And she let the family go on hanging their hall with flowers and polishing their name, never suspecting that the cleaner they had paid to vanish was about to walk into the one room they could not empty. With the truth in a folder and the law on her side, the day of the wedding came, and it was, fittingly, a thing the family's money had built. The grand hall of an expensive hotel had been hung with white and gold, the tables laid with more than the poor see in a year, the photographers moving among the old families of Lagos in their finest lace and agbada. Dr. Ikenna Balagoon stood handsome and gleaming beside his elegant bride. Chief Emeka moving among the important guests with the smooth ease of a man whose books would not bear a close look. The whole family arranged at the high table, like a portrait of everything they wanted the world to believe about them. Ikenna had been told the cleaner was gone, paid off and vanished, and he had put the small ugliness out of his mind, because a man does not think about the floor he stands on while he is being toasted. He did not know that Barrister Adora Eze sat quietly among the guests in her charcoal blazer with a leather folder on her lap, an old friend of his mother's, invited as such, and unremarkable. He did not know that Sister Comfort waited near the side doors in her good clothes, or that Mama Tessie stood among the staff. And he certainly did not know that when the speeches began, and the master of ceremonies invited the family's old friends to say a word for the late Madame Alucci, whose absence from her only son's wedding was so deeply felt, Adaura Eze would rise, with the calm of a woman who has the truth in a folder, and take the microphone not to give a toast, but to do her duty as the dead woman's executor. She did not raise her voice. The truly powerful do not need to. She said that she was Barrister Adaura Eze, that she had been Madame Alucci's lawyer and friend for many years, and that the old woman had left a last wish that she had asked be honored before the family and its friends all gathered together, which they now, by happy chance, were. And before Chief Emeka, whose smooth face had gone suddenly rigid, could do more than half rise from his chair, she had opened the leather folder, and broken the old wax seal, and untied the faded red ribbon, and begun to read the true will of Madame Alucci Balagoon aloud into the silence of that bright hall. She read it plainly, in the level voice of a woman who has watched the powerful talk themselves into corners for 30 years, and the room went quiet the way a room goes quiet when something is happening that cannot be stopped. She read the date and the witnesses. She read the old woman's own confession of the wrong done long ago to a housemaid named Chidinma, cast out pregnant from the family's house and erased. She read the part where Madame Alucci named that housemaid's daughter, one Ngozi Okeke, as her natural granddaughter and a rightful heir to a stated share of the Balagoon estate. And she read the name slowly, the name underlined twice in a dead woman's careful hand, and as she read it the side doors opened, and Ngozi Okeke walked into that hall. She did not come in a cleaner's gray. She came in her best plain blouse and wrapper, with the cloth-wrapped letter in her hand and her back as straight as her mother had ever held hers, and she walked the length of that bright hall through the turning heads and the lifting cameras, past the tables of the old families, and stood, for the second time in a week, in front of Dr. Ikenna Balagoon, this time in a room he could not have her walked out of. The doctor's face went white with recognition. The cleaner, the woman he had paid to vanish, here, now, named in his own mother's will in front of everyone he wanted to impress. And Chief Emeka was on his feet, his voice climbing, demanding to know the meaning of this, calling it a stunt, an outrage, declaring the woman a fraud and the document a forgery, and shouting for security to remove them both before another word was said. And Barrister Adaura Eze let them say all of it, the way she had let powerful men hang themselves for 30 years. And then she raised one hand, and the room went still again, and she said, in the dry voice of a woman with the proof in a folder, that no one was being removed, because she would not stand by while a dead woman's clear and witnessed last wishes were shouted down by the very man who had spent 4 years burying them, and the press, she noted, were already recording. The will was no forgery, she said. It was executed before 2 witnesses, one of whom was present in this hall, and a second executed copy had sat in her own safe, beyond anyone's reach, since the week Madame Alucci signed it. Then she called Sister Comfort, and Sister Comfort came forward in her good clothes and told the silent room, plainly, that she was a senior nurse who had cared for Madame Alucci in her last weeks, that she had been one of the 2 witnesses to this true will, and that she had with her own eyes seen the quiet young woman now standing before them sit at the dying woman's bedside in the evenings when the family had gone home. Madame Alucci, she said, had known exactly what she was doing, and exactly who Ngozi was, and had begged that the wrong be put right. When Chief Emeka tried to shout her down as a disgruntled employee with a grudge, Barrister Adaura Eze observed, dryly, that Sister Comfort was not in the family's employ at all, and never had been, and the hall, which had begun to understand, turned its faces toward the high table and the smooth, heavy man whose voice had risen so high. And then Ngozi spoke, for the first time, into that quiet. She did not shout, and she did not weep, and she did not point. She said, simply, that her mother had been a housemaid in this family's house, and had been put out of its gate pregnant, and paid to be silent, and had raised her daughter alone, and poor and proud, and died without ever telling her the family's name, to spare her the weight of it. She said that Madame Malucci had found her, late, and told her the truth, and given her this letter, and asked her to keep it until the day it had to be spoken. She drew the dead woman's letter from its cloth, and did not read all of it, only the one line, that a name cannot be paid away, and blood does not become less true, because the rich decide to forget it. And she said that 3 days before, in the lobby of the hospital this family had named for itself, the son of this house had pressed 20,000 naira into her hand and told her to disappear before this very wedding, and that she had set the money down and kept her word and waited for this room. She said it without bitterness, which was the hardest thing of all, and it landed in that bright hall harder than any accusation could have. The doctor's face, which had been white with shock, began, against his will, to be something else. Because there is a point past which a thing stops being deniable, and a hall full of the people he most wanted to impress had just watched him pass it. He had paid his own sister to vanish. He had not known, but he had not wanted to know, and the difference in that room did not save him. It was then that the second truth came out, the one Chief Emeka had been most afraid of. Barrister Adaura Eze turned, almost as an afterthought, to the man still standing rigid at the high table, and remarked that when a true will is reopened, the law requires a full and formal accounting of the estate it concerns, and that such an accounting would naturally examine every movement of the family's money, since Madame Malucci's health had failed, and Chief Emeka had taken her affairs in hand. Emeka's smooth face drained, and the old families turned to look at him, because some of them managed money too and knew exactly what such an accounting meant. The man who had shouted loudest that Ngozi was a fraud, who had needed her erased above all others, was the truest thief in the room. He had buried the dead woman's wishes and bled her estate, and he had needed the cleaner gone, because her name brought the will, and the will brought the auditors, and the auditors would find him. He left that hall a far smaller man than he had entered it, and the auditors came, and in the weeks that followed, the charges came after them. Ngozi did not gloat, because it was not in her, and it had never been the point. She stood in the middle of that bright hall with her grandmother's letter against her chest, and let the silence be the verdict it was. And the only thing she said, into the quiet and the cameras, was that she had not come to ruin a wedding, and did not want anyone's celebration. She had come because a dead woman had asked her to, and because her own mother had been erased once, and she would not let it be done to her a second time. She wanted only what was hers, her name, her mother's name, set right at last where it had been wronged, and the child in her care kept safe. And she said it without bitterness, which was the hardest thing of all, and it landed in that hall heavier than any curse. It did not all knit together at once. These things never do. But it came. With the press recording and the will beyond denial, and the witnesses standing, the family that had paid a poor woman to disappear was made to honor the true will. Properly and in full, the stated share of the estate transferred to Ngozi, where it could not be wriggled out of. Her place in the family acknowledged in the law and on paper. And Dr. Ikenna Balogun came, in time and in private, to do the harder thing too. To sit across from the sister he had tried to pay away, and say the word he had not said in the lobby, which was sorry, And to mean it, a proud man humbled too late and just in time into understanding what he had nearly trampled. He had grown up an only child in a house built on a silence, and he found, late, that he had a sister, and that she was a better person than the family that had hidden her. Ngozi did not move into the world of the high table and the long gate, though the door was open now. She took what was rightly hers, and built instead the thing the old woman would have understood. She brought the small child into a real home at last, with a room of its own and a school paid for to the end. The first promise kept in full. She kept faith with the people who had stood by her, Mama Tessie and Sister Comfort and Barrister Adaura Eze. Because Ngozi did not forget a kindness any more than her mother or her grandmother had taught her to. And with a share of what she had been given, she did a thing that made the old woman's conscience, wherever it had gone, finally rest. She set up a small fund at the Balagoon Memorial Hospital for the lowest paid staff, the cleaners and the porters and the aides, the invisible people who push the mops and carry the trays, so that the next time the powerful in that building looked down at someone in a gray uniform, there would be at least one quiet reminder that the floor a great house stands on is laid by human hands. There was an evening, months after, the new home quiet, and the child asleep over a schoolbook, when Ngozi took the cream envelope out of the drawer where it now lived and set it open on the desk. The will and the letter and the faded red ribbon. And she did not weep this time. And she was not angry this time. She read her grandmother's words once more. You are not nothing. You were never nothing. A name cannot be paid away. Open it where they cannot look away. And she understood, fully now, that the old woman had told her exactly how to win 4 years before there was anything to win. She smoothed the dated page with her name underlined twice. The only inheritance that had ever truly been meant for her. And it was not nothing. And it had never been nothing. So here's what I would leave with you tonight, before the light goes. The world will always find it easier to pay a poor woman to disappear than to ask who she really is, and quicker to call her a stranger at the gate than to admit she was family all along. But the truth of a person cannot be sealed away forever, and a name written down in love by the dead has a way of being spoken at last, even out of an old envelope, in a room where no one can look away. They paid her to vanish, and she did not vanish, and the silence did not hold. So I will ask you this, and I will be reading every answer. If you had been Ngozi Okeke, handed money to erase yourself by the very people who owed you everything, would you have taken the envelope and quietly disappeared? Or would you have done what she did, kept your word to the dead, and opened the truth where they could not look away? Tell me honestly which of those two you are. The one who takes the money and goes, or the one who waits and stands and makes them say her name. And so the fire burns low under the old Baobab tree. Stay a while and tell me in the comments where you watched from. B-roll image prompts per beat.